Please be advised, this episode does have content that some may find distressing. As always, listener discretion is advised and it is not suitable for anyone under the age of 13.
Hello and welcome to It's Murder Up North. In the previous instalments, I covered the case of Diane Sindel, who was attacked in Birkenhead in August 1986. Yet hers would be one of a number of murders to take place within a 12-month time frame. Over the next series of episodes, I shall delve into 3 of these cases, starting with the disappearance of 19-year-old Alison Day on a cold December night in 1985. On the 23rd of May 1966, Alison June Day was born at Hackney Hospital. She would go on to bless the lives of Kenneth and Barbara Day, who adopted the baby when she was roughly 7 months old. Alison and her brother were raised in a close-knit and loving household, in a home located on Norfolk Road in Upminster, an affluent suburb in East London. At 11, she started at Gaynes School, alongside Martin Farquhar, whose father would later investigate Alison's murder. His son recalled his former school friend as a pretty girl with blonde hair. I can see her standing with her friends in the playground under the cycle sheds. Upon leaving school, the popular blonde with piercing brown eyes secured work as a solicitor's clerk in nearby Hornchurch, where she was considered bubbly and reliable. Traits she utilised when assisting with the local brownies at the nearby St. Lawrence Church. At 17 years old, she would meet her future fiancé, Paul Tidyman. 3 years her senior, he would propose to Alison shortly before Christmas 1985. Yet the pair did not plan to marry until they were financially stable. According to Alison's neighbours, the couple were rarely apart and seemed very happy in each other's company. But on Sunday the 29th of December 1985, this happiness would be decimated. Alison and Paul had planned to go out for drinks that night, but an issue with the machinery at the printworks where her fiancé was employed had resulted in him having to stay late at work that night. Still eager to spend time together, he invited the 19-year-old to join him. Alison had never been to Paul's workplace, Fairways Graphics on Berkshire Road in Hackney Wick. As such, he provided her with detailed directions which she diligently jotted down. She agreed to see him at around 7:10 and ended the call by bidding her beloved goodbye. The 19-year-old then prepared for her departure, combing her shoulder-length hair and opting to wear jeans paired with white and pink flat shoes. Once ready, she joined her family for tea at the table, where her bubbly banter disguised any signs of anxiety she may have had regarding the journey ahead of her, a nervousness born from knowing that one of her close friends had recently been raped, and according to another friend, this had left Alison feeling on edge whenever she went out. But perhaps she pushed these fears aside, with the thought that soon she would be seeing her fiancé. Finishing her warm meal, Alison neatly placed her knife and fork back on the plate and declined the offer of dessert, joking with her father that she didn't want to get fat like him, before politely asking her mother for some money for the train fare. The teenager then rose from the table and headed into the hallway, where she donned her warm sheepskin coat, placing the £2 for her one-way fare in the pocket, alongside the handwritten directions. Calling out goodbye to her parents in the dining room, Alison stepped out into the dark December night. Meanwhile, at Hackney Wick, Paul could see the trains arriving and departing through the windows of his workplace, and as he continued about his job, he kept an observant eye on their movements, while also checking the time. Seeing the 7:10 train from Stratford slowly pulling into the station, his heart fluttered with the thought that soon he would see Alison, knowing that it was less than a 5-minute walk from the platform to his location on Berkshire Road. But by 7:15 there was no sign of her, nor did she arrive by 20 past. And although he wasn't supposed to leave the machinery unattended, he considered that although it seemed like a straightforward route from the station to Fairways Graphics, perhaps in the darkness and unfamiliar with the area, Alison had become lost in the warren of industrial units that surrounded the train station. Therefore he set off towards the dimly lit platforms, ascending to the raised section from where the city could be seen rolling out before him, the lights twinkling in the chilled night air. With temperatures dipping below freezing, he pulled his coat tight as he scanned for any signs of movement. From the deserted platform he made his way into the labyrinth of industrial units, usually bustling with noise, but many had been shuttered for the festive season, leaving the streets silent and empty, with only his shadow for company. Having scoured the streets and finding no sign of Alison, Paul called her parents. Speaking to Kenneth, it was confirmed that the 19-year-old had left the home as agreed, and therefore she should have arrived on time. However, between her home and Paul's workplace, Alison would have to undertake a 300-yard walk to Upminster Bridge tube station, from where she likely caught a bus to Romford, then a train from there to Stratford, from where she would have taken her second train to arrive at Hackney Wick, before undertaking the last 5 minutes of her journey on foot. Given the number of changes the 19-year-old had to undertake, it was possible that she had been delayed. Yet a phone call to British Rail and the bus companies swiftly laid waste to that notion. Learning that there was no reason for her to be late, all her loved ones could think about was that at some point during her 9-mile journey, Alison had been waylaid. With such a large area, there was no way of them knowing at what stage this could have occurred. As such, Kenneth Day contacted the police 2 hours after Alison was supposed to have arrived at Paul's workplace. As people prepared to celebrate the new year, newspapers began to report on the disappearance of the 19-year-old. It had been established that Alison had made the 300-yard journey to the bus stop, and she had been seen by a friend at Romford, affirming that she had continued her journey on to Stratford. But it wasn't certain whether she fulfilled the remainder of her intended journey by boarding the Northern Line train from Stratford to Hackney Wick. It was reported that police had concentrated their efforts on the area surrounding her intended destination, with a helicopter hovering above the metal rooftops of the various warehouses, while officers on the ground scoured the streets and narrow passageways. Searches with dogs fanned out across waste ground and the footprints of demolished structures, while others slowly traversed the towpath of the nearby River Lee and Navigation Canal. Despite the still waters being coated in icy sheets, specialist divers were brought in to delve into the treacherous and murky canal, where detritus and debris, including old branches and shopping trolleys, posed the risk of trapping them beneath the surface. The freezing temperatures hampered their search even further, limiting the amount of time each diver could spend in the water, while the limited daylight hours reduced that time further. Given her stable career, happy home life, and no other apparent reason to choose to disappear, detectives had already begun to suspect that something nefarious had befallen Alison, with a Scotland Yard spokesman informing the press, the family and her fiancé know of no reason why she should have gone missing, and we are concerned for her safety. Adding that it was possible the 19-year-old had been attacked or abducted. The New Year celebrations came and went, and slowly the businesses around Hackney Wick began production once more. While the staff had enjoyed their holidays, the downtime during the previous week had hindered the police operation, as the shuttered buildings and empty streets meant that the chances of finding potential witnesses were slim. One person that was key to the early stages of the investigation was Paul Tidyman, Alison's 22-year-old fiancé, who, unlike his colleagues, didn't return to work. Instead, he endured hours of questioning. Statistically, he was a potential suspect, and although he may be innocent, a skeptical officer also had to consider the other side of the coin. Was his relationship with Alison really a happy one? Had there been infidelity? Or had the pair had an argument that had gone too far and he was trying to cover it up? Or could it have been premeditated, with him luring the trusting Alison to an isolated location where he knew there would be no witnesses? While some viewed Paul with suspicion, others believed something else may have occurred and still considered the possibility that Alison may never have arrived at Hackney Wick. She may have been abducted or, despite her happy facade, had chosen to disappear. Her parents clung to the hopes that Alison was still alive, and although they didn't speak to the press in the early stages, they kept a vigil by the phone, hopeful that they would hear her voice. As they lingered in their home, the police investigation stepped up, with commuters returning to work. Officers established roadblocks, while others boarded buses and trains, keen to speak to anyone who may have been travelling after 6 p.m. that Sunday night, while posters were displayed in prime locations to catch the eye of any potential witnesses. In spite of their efforts, they generated very few leads, and by the 2nd of January Kenneth Day made an impassioned appeal, which was printed in the Daily Star the following morning. Addressing those gathered, he stated, "My little girl is gone, and God knows what's happened to her." He said, "My wife and I are going through torture. We know she wouldn't simply run away. She was happy at home. If anybody has got her, then please let her go. We are desperate to have her back. All we have left now is some sort of hope." His worried words were echoed by the police, including Detective Superintendent Eric Brown, who admitted it is possible she has been murdered, although there is no firm evidence she has come to harm, adding, "We are keeping an open mind, though possibilities of what might have happened to her are endless. She may have run away, but there are no indications at all that there was any difficulties at home." These concerns would grow when on the 7th of January 1986, a 20-year-old woman was assaulted at knife point, not far from Hackney Wick Station. And while there was nothing to conclusively connect this attack to Alison's case, it was an unnerving aspect the police were forced to consider. As the unexplained disappearance entered its 3rd week, the investigation had stalled. They had gathered over 200 statements, but were yet to find any key witnesses or traces of Alison, leaving them with very little to work with. Eager to keep up the momentum, they turned to London Weekend Television and their Police 5 series, which aired a reconstruction of Alison's last known movements, alongside another appeal from her family. One lead proved particularly pertinent, that of ticket collector Rose Lee, who recalled a blonde girl in her late teens rushing up to her at around 7 p.m. on Sunday the 29th of December, asking what platform to take for Hackney Wick. Upon being informed it was number 1, the bubbly young girl commented on how cold it was, thanked Rose, and then scurried off to board the train. It was an interaction the ticket collector later recalled, as there had been very few travellers that night. It wasn't unusual for the station to be quiet after about 6:30, as it was located on the North London Link line, but it was likely quieter due to the fact that many workers were on holiday over Christmas and New Year, meaning Alison may have been the only passenger that evening. Upon the train's arrival, it would have been a simple 2-minute trip to the next stop of Hackney Wick, from where Alison was supposed to make her way out of the station and head towards the dark and desolate industrial estate. Now police knew she had likely boarded the train. The question became, had she disembarked at her intended location? If so, where had she gone from there? It had been 15 days since she disappeared, and Paul had reluctantly returned to Fairways Graphic, while police continued their search of the area surrounding his workplace. Alison's loved ones had endured the uncertainty of not knowing what had occurred. With Paul being her partner, he continued to be viewed as a potential suspect. But was he really responsible for Alison's disappearance? Or did his feelings of guilt stem from the fact that his fiancé had been asked to walk through a dark, unfamiliar industrial estate alone, during which something terrible had happened to her? Did he blame himself, like many have done over the years, for not meeting her at the station? The mounting suspicions was only worsened when the news broke on Wednesday the 15th of January that a body had been recovered from the River Lee, at the point where it flowed past Gainsborough Primary School, within 100 yards of Paul's workplace. The discovery was made by police divers at around 10 a.m, with the news trickling through to the employees at the printworks, who, in their desire to protect Paul, switched off the radios to ensure he didn't inadvertently hear the news before the police could inform him. Recalling the 22-year-old's reaction to this new development, his boss stated, "He took it very badly. He was in tears, although the police broke it to him as gently as possible. We all feel very sorry for him." Paul was hastily hurried out of the building, away from the prying eyes of the press, and it was soon confirmed that the body was that of 19-year-old Alison Day, with the new question being how the teenager's life had ended in a canal less than a mile away from the hospital where she was born. Given her body was found so close to the printworks, one possible explanation was that, despite Paul's directions, Alison had left the train station and become disorientated in the unfamiliar surroundings. Fighting the bitter cold, she may have been unnerved by the silent streets and briskly walked in the wrong direction. In doing so, she had inadvertently found herself on the dark towpath where she slipped on ice and fell into the water. But as her body was being recovered, any suggestions of an accident were quickly dismissed, as was the possibility that she had been the victim of a mugging gone wrong. About her neck, Alison was wearing a gold chain with a pendant of her name, and upon her left hand her engagement ring still glistened. Upon her wrist was her gold rectangular-faced Psycho watch. The hands stopped at 8:10, although it could not initially be established whether this was AM or PM. Further testing on a replica and an estimated time of death helped determine that the watch had entered the water in the evening. Police now knew that Alison had made it to Hackney Wick, and they had an idea of when she had died. But they now needed to discover what had happened between her stepping off the train at 7:10 and her death an hour later. Where had Alison been while Paul was out searching for her? And who had taken her life? Due to the body being in the water for 17 days, vital clues had been lost. Her coat and shoes were missing. The former was recovered by Navy SEALs on a training exercise just a short distance away from where the body was retrieved. However, her pink and white shoes were never found. The sheepskin coat provided investigators with a number of clues. Granite bricks had been placed in the pockets, suggesting the killer had attempted to weigh down the body. Another item recovered from inside the coat was a slip of paper with handwritten directions, which Kenneth Day later confirmed belonged to Alison. Regarding his examination of the coat, scientist Dr. Jeffrey Rose would tell Crime Watch Files in 1988 that the item was, quote, muddy and covered with the remains of small animals from the river. The coat, which took 2 days to dry, was then subjected to the taping process, but the condition in which the item was found made this a difficult task, Dr. Rose had explained, but he went on to state, "However, we could see that we were picking up fibres on the tapings, some of which might have come from the attacker, so we knew if the murderer was caught there was some possibility that we could match fibres on the tapings to fibres on his clothing, but the chances were very slim." Given the length of time the body had been in the water, any clue, no matter how small, was crucial in hopefully apprehending the culprit, an individual the police were eager to catch, given the brutal attack Alison had been subjected to. It was established that the teenager had been raped and beaten. Her assailant had cut her blouse into strips, one to bind her hands, one to gag her, and another had been used to strangle the 19-year-old. Upon her death, the police believed the culprit had pushed the body into the freezing waters, the heavy stones in her pockets assisting in dragging the remains into the murky depths. One detail which was kept from the public was the manner in which Alison was strangled, information the pathologist, Dr. Peter Vanessas, would discuss during the 1988 Crime Files episode, in which he stated, "I found that this lady, who had a ligature around her neck, had also had this ligature tightened with a tourniquet. A branch was used from somewhere nearby. In addition to this, there was also a knot which had been tied into the ligature around the front of her neck, in order to tighten the neck even further and have an effect, therefore, on the voice box. The fact that we had this combination of injuries led us to believe the possibility the person involved may have been someone who knew something about martial arts, or indeed possibly someone who'd been in the armed forces, but of course at that stage this was mere speculation." The use of a tourniquet was a unique feature, hence why the police kept the information from the public, but it did help provide a clue to the background of the individual they were seeking, opening up 3 potential leads. Had the individual been taught the technique through a first aid course, with the tourniquet being used to help reduce blood flow to an injured limb? However, by 1986 it had been deemed that this had the potential to do more harm than good. As such, it had been phased out. Therefore, anyone practicing it had likely been trained prior to this change. That did little to narrow down the thousands of people who were being taught first aid every year. Another possibility was that the perpetrator was a city and guild carpenter, as they were taught to use a tourniquet to secure a piece of wood while glue was setting. But once again, this did little to narrow down the field of suspects. The third option, as hinted at by Dr. Vanessas, was that the killer was familiar with martial arts, through which he had become acquainted with this particular technique. But once more, there was no way to determine where this knowledge had been gleaned. It could have been from textbooks, films, or through martial arts classes, some of which were carried out by unlicensed instructors. From the few clues left behind by the killer, the police knew they were dealing with a cruel individual who had a propensity for violence and some forensic awareness. It was also feared that he may strike again. With this latter thought in mind, Detective Superintendent Eric Brown, who was leading the investigation, issued a warning to women in which he stated, "If you are out on your own late at night, stay away from large, unlit industrial or open areas." Regarding Alison's death, he continued, "At this stage, we could be looking for any sort of murderer. There is always the possibility that he could strike again, and that is why we have warned women to be careful." DS Eric Brown would also address the attack on the 20-year-old woman, which occurred on the 7th of January, not far from when Alison's body had been found. He advised the press that they were considering whether the 2 incidents were connected. As the missing persons investigation had been escalated to a murder inquiry, Alison's loved ones were faced with losing the hope they had clung to, and in a brief statement issued to the press, Kenneth Day said, "This is awful, dreadful. We lived in hope that she would turn up, but this is our worst fears realized." Paul would also issue a short response, with him stating, "I just want whoever did this to Alison to be caught. I want him caught now." Alison's family, friends, and fiancé would be united in their grief, as the 19-year-old was laid to rest on Friday the 21st of February 1986 in a service held at St Andrews in Hornchurch. Standing before the mourners, Reverend David Rosendale expressed the feelings of all those gathered by stating, "May the perpetrator of evil be quickly caught." It was a sentiment shared by the investigating officers, especially when it was revealed on the 18th of January that they were considering the possibility that Alison had been the victim of what the Sunday Express reported were two London rapists, responsible for at least 27 attacks across the capital. While there was no evidence to indicate that there had been more than one perpetrator in Alison's case, consideration had to be given to the supposition that perhaps one of the two men who had up until this point operated as a pair had gone solo and escalated his crimes to murder. However, with the startling statistic that reports of rapes and attempted rapes had gone up by 56% on the previous year, there was also a chance that they were dealing with a new and as yet unidentified threat to women in the capital. Yet the police had very little to work with, save for a few fibres on the court and the method of strangulation, neither of which helped to narrow down the suspect pool. And aside from the sighting of Alison at Stretford Station, no other witnesses had come forward to report seeing the 19-year-old, either on the train or upon her arrival at Hackney Wick. After 2 months, the investigation was going cold, and in a bid to reach a wider audience, the Metropolitan Police turned to Crime Watch UK, who aired a reconstruction of Alison's final moments. Chosen for the task of portraying Alison was actress Karen Corty, who spoke to the Daily Express regarding the experience prior to the show airing. She described the reenactment as very eerie and unnerving, adding, "I was very aware that the girl I was playing had been brutally murdered." Going on to detail the final stretch of the teenager's journey, the actress stated, "As I reached the last place Alison was seen alive, I was very scared, and it shook me up quite a bit. I could sense the fear that Alison might have felt as she made that journey." Karen concluded by stating, "After playing the part and knowing what happened, I now think twice about going out alone at night." The reconstruction, which aired on the 27th of February 1986, started by depicting Alison's phone call with Paul, as she agreed to meet him at Fairways Graphics and her jotting down the directions. She was then shown enjoying her final meal with her family, prior to heading out the front door. Karen, who was said to bear a striking resemblance to Alison, was then depicted traversing the 300 yards from the teenager's home on Norfolk Road to a bus stop located outside Upminster Bridge tube station, her hands plunged deep into her pockets and the collar of her coat pulled up about her neck to protect her bare skin from the bitter cold. Shortly after she arrived at the stop, the welcoming lights of the single-decker bus to Romford Station came into view, and the teenager had eagerly climbed aboard and took her seat for the 10-minute journey. Alighting at the station, Alison hurried to board the train to Stratford in East London, arriving there at around 7 p.m. It was here that ticket collector Rose Lee would become the last known person to have seen the young woman, recalling seeing the solitary figure hurry off towards the deserted Platform 1. Within 2 minutes of boarding the train, Alison would have arrived at Hackney Wick, but the police could only theorise what occurred once she stepped from the carriage, and they were particularly eager to discern what had happened between her arrival at 7:10 and her body entering the canal at 8:10. As stated, they considered that after getting off the train, Alison had made her way down the ramp away from the station and had lost her way. Perhaps she had headed to the junction of Berkshire Road and Wallace Road. But contrary to the instructions given by Paul to follow Berkshire Road, where she would have found Fairways Graphics on the right-hand side, Alison had inadvertently followed Wallace Road, which bent round to the right and led her towards a printer's yard, to the rear of which flowed the canal. The yard was known to be frequented by individuals who would rifle through the discarded prints of adult magazines, particularly with the building shut down for the festive season, meaning they were less likely to be caught. It was theorised that her killer may also have been loitering in that area, and perhaps they had followed or led Alison to the canal. Alternatively, Alison had taken the correct route towards Fairways Graphics, heading up Berkshire Road, but maybe she missed the front entrance and ended up taking the track that ran at the rear of the property, which once again took her to the canal and the hands of her killer. It was, however, revealed on the Crime Watch appeal that a taxi firm had received a phone call at 13 minutes past 7 from a woman in a distressed state, who requested a car to take her from Hackney Wick to Hackney. However, upon being advised that there would be a delay in getting to her, the call abruptly ended, either because the receiver had been returned to its cradle, or the caller had simply run out of money. The police believed this call was significant, as it was made around the time Alison had arrived at the station, and if it had been her, they pondered the idea that she may have placed the call because she was lost, or perhaps something or someone unnerved her, and that individual had taken her shortly after she left the phone box. There was no concrete means to prove that Alison made the call, and all the police theories were based on possible scenarios. Had she become lost and encountered her killer, perhaps she came across an individual posing as a good Samaritan, or possibly as a taxi driver who offered to assist the 19-year-old in her endeavour to get to her fiancé's workplace, but instead they led her to her death. The problem was, without any witnesses, they couldn't confirm or rule out any of these scenarios. As such, Detective Superintendent Eric Brown asked Crime Watch viewers to come forwards if they had heard or seen anything, such as a woman screaming, or perhaps a heavy splash into the water. He particularly wanted to hear from individuals who lived on the nearby Trowbridge estate, who may have noticed something untoward, no matter how insignificant it may seem. Local residents were also asked to keep a lookout for Alison's soft pink and white lace-up leather Oxford brogues, which may have been discarded on wasteland or amidst the run-down garages or warehouses that populated the canal side. The detective went on to address women who lived and worked in the area, asking them to come forward if they had been attacked or had a frightening encounter with an individual within the last 4 years. D.S. Brown went on to acknowledge that attacks had occurred in the area previously. This appeal led to 38 women contacting the studio or the police directly to disclose previously unreported assault. One side of policing which is rarely considered is the impact that some cases can have on individual officers, and Barry Fife would later speak to the author Simon Farquhar about 2 female police officers who had to go through the hundreds of statements collected during the investigation. These included the reports from the women who had been attacked. Outside of their uniforms, these 2 officers were also young women who had to leave work and travel home late at night, with the horrors of what they had read still fresh in their minds. It was a situation which Mr. Fife stated was often forgotten, with him pointing out, "These people on these teams are ordinary human beings." Aside from the women reporting attacks, the appeal also generated other calls. The majority placed Alison on the various trains and buses she had taken on the night of December the 29th, which helped to confirm her route but did little to move the investigation forwards. The lack of progress meant that the lead investigators were being put under pressure to wrap up the case, as the resources and funds were required elsewhere. the number of allocated officers dwindled, and it appeared Alison's murder would soon become a cold case. It was around this time that Charles Farquhar was brought onto the inquiry. Despite the pressure from his superiors, he insisted that the investigation continued, and he sought to revisit everything with a fresh perspective. This included interviewing key witnesses and revisiting the prospect that Paul Tidyman was involved. Detective Farquhar swiftly dismissed this upon speaking to the bereaved 22-year-old, but this failed to stop the public from speculating about Paul's possible guilt. Despite his efforts, Charles was encountering the same roadblocks as his predecessors. There simply wasn't enough to move the investigation forwards, and once again his superiors threatened to pull the resources. In a book detailing Charles's involvement in the case, his son Simon Farquhar addressed his father's reaction to the proposal, in which he detailed a passionate exchange with the police governor, where the detective insisted, quote, "If you want me to close it down, you do that, but you can be the one to tell Mr. and Mrs. Day we're not going to look for their daughter's killer anymore." This naturally speaks of Charles's dedication as a detective, but part of me wonders whether his drive to solve Alison's murder was also influenced by the knowledge that the teenager had lived just round the corner from where he used to buy his Sunday newspaper, and she had been a pupil at his son's school. Although these are small connections, sometimes that is all it takes to give a person some extra motivation, especially when the odds are against them. The lack of progress was also causing growing speculation, while the public had their own opinions on what had happened. One reporter opted to create a story, which suggested a guitar string had been utilised to strangle Alison. This became one of many false narratives which began to take place of the facts. The only thing that was certain was that Alison had been subjected to a vicious assault at the hands of a killer who needed to be caught before he killed again. Join me next time as I delve into a second high-profile murder which occurred in 1986.
So in the meantime, keep an eye on those shadows.